Okay, welcome to the Week 12 homepage and your to-do list. We are still working on Unit 2.4 Proofs. We're starting a new unit, 3.2 Probability, and we're continuing to work on 4.3 Informal Fallacies. If we scroll down to the sort of calendar course module version, you can see we're on Week 12, Proofs, Probability, Informal Fallacies. I'm going to make a separate video about the probability module. So let's start by taking a look at the proofs module. Okay, so we're week 12 and there are suggestions for practice here. So start with this practice drill. That's a recommendation. It's not part of the homework. This is part of your sort of suggested practice for the week. So start with the drill. The purpose of this drill, let's take a quick look at it. The purpose of this drill is to really just memorize the patterns. Most of what you're going to do in this module requires much more than memorization, but this is the part where we focus on memorizing. So let's just take a really quick look at what's in here. So each of our inference rules in the proof section embodies a valid argument form. And we start by looking at a couple of them with their truth tables to prove that they're valid. So the ones you should be familiar with already by now: modus ponens, modus tollens, disjunctive syllogism. And then here are a couple that are invalid argument forms, so would not make good rules. So drill number 1. Determine whether or not these arguments are valid or invalid, and if valid, identify the form. That's going to be one of the 3 that were just introduced. And so the purpose of this is to identify what is essential to the argument form, because the number 1 thing you shouldn't do is memorize just this basic schematic. What do I mean by schematic? If we go back to the argument form, I'm referring to these things with Greek letters, where Greek letters stand for any statement, as a schematic. So let's take a look at a valid one. Disjunctive syllogism. The point isn't to have the second one have a tilde, or what. So there are things about the schematic that are essential and things that aren't. And where tildes are is not what's essential. So part of the reason to go through this is to make sure you're recognizing what is essential to an argument form. So, for example, many students think this one looks like modus tollens because it has a bunch of tildes in it, whereas the schematic for modus ponens has no tildes. But this is not modus tollens. It's also not modus ponens. This one is invalid. Here's one that looks like the schematic of modus tollens. This one, many students will think is modus ponens because there are no tildes and there's a horseshoe and it kind of looks like it, but it's not. What's essential for modus ponens is that you have a conditional, you have the antecedent of the conditional on a line, and then you can infer the consequent. But this has the consequent on a new line and infers the antecedent. It's backwards. So the purpose of this is to go through and make sure you're identifying what is essential to our argument forms and can tell the difference between our 3 patterns that we've introduced, modus ponens, tollens, and disjunctive syllogism, and 2 that look like those but are invalid. Okay, so definitely do that. Okay, next, practice exercises. So scrolling down 3.2 through 3.6, the introductory exercises. Now, you don't have to do all of them. The goal is to do practice exercises that are at the right skill level for you. So there are suggestions here for where to start. And you might start by doing a couple of problems from 3.4 or 3.6. So scroll down. What's 3.4? 3.4 is where you're using 2 rules at once. And 3.6 is where you add in 2 additional rules, and if you can easily do a couple of those, maybe you're done for the week, or maybe move on to all 5 basic rules. And then the homework assignment. So the idea is that you should practice before you do the homework assignment. Now what you'll find when you do the homework assignment, I'm going to open up one of these practice worksheets. So the kinds of questions you'll see in this week's homework assignment are the guided proofs. So the ones where you're asked to fill in the justifications, or where you're asked to use the justifications to complete the proof. You'll see questions that are like that, and they will use all 5 of the basic rules. Okay, so that's what to study this week, and that's what to expect in the homework. Okay, now let's move on to Unit 4, Informal Fallacies, another module that we are continuing with. And again, there's a week-by-week guide, what to look at in the module. So we are in week 12, and we're starting to practice passage analysis and evaluation. And this week, we're going to continue looking at the 3 we've already introduced, equivocation, ad populum, and ad hominem. And we're going to add straw person to the mix. So you might want to review the text. Part 2 here is the one that goes through each of the 4 fallacies, especially the new one, straw person. And review the fallacy passage analysis guide, because there is going to be at least 1 short answer question per week, and you'll want to use the fallacies passage analysis guide as your guide to answering these questions. And even though they're not worth a ton by way of points, you definitely want to practice these in your homework assignments, because you're going to see questions like this on the quiz and on the final exam. And so getting a chance to practice them in a low stakes situation is important. And one last bit of advice is to, I've already suggested you review the passage analysis guide. For the non-short answer homeworks, you'll find that instead of multiple choice this time, it's drop-down menus. But for these non-short answer questions in this week's homework, you'll want to use the passage analysis process to answer them, because one of the most important things we're doing is actually evaluating the argument we're given, and some of them will merely look like fallacies, as in they kind of have some similarities to the pattern, but are not actually fallacious. And so being able to tell the difference is going to be really important, which means you need to go beyond just spotting patterns like, hey, a person's being attacked, and analyze whether or not the premises provide good support for the conclusion. So going through the process will help you to get those right. Okay, so that's our look at this week, proofs and informal fallacies, and I'm going to make a separate video for probability, and then as always, complete your week 12 check-in before the end of the week. I look forward to hearing from you there.